back to my channel. In this video I wish to review this book here, which is called What is Life? Understand Biology in 5 Steps, and it's from the Nobel Prize winner Paul Nurse. Now this book it was actually published in 2020 in Britain, so quite recently. Paul Nurse is a Nobel Prize winning geneticist and cell biologist who has worked on how the reproduction of cells is controlled. This is his first book, and it attempts to kind of boil down biology into 5 understandable steps that sort of a layperson can understand, although having said that, parts of the book are quite complicated. It moves through, it starts from the most basic fundamental unit of life, which is the cell, or biology's atom, through the gene, the test of time, evolution by natural selection, chance and necessity, life as chemistry, order from chaos, and finally life as information, working as a whole. There's then a chapter entitled Changing the World, where he looks at how some of the insights gained from biology could potentially be applied in terms of tackling climate change and certain diseases. And then finally he concludes by drawing together all of the information into a sort of conclusion in what is life. So I just wish to just kind of like review the book, as it were, and just go through some of the main things that I jotted down that I took from this book, really. So as I say, so in the first chapter he starts off with the cell, and that is the simplest thing that is alive. That's the cell. It's the most basic unit of life. The cell itself is alive. It's literally alive. It contains all of the essential criterion of life. It reproduces, it grows, it's self-contained and organised. It's alive, and it actually comes from the Latin cella, which literally means a small room or cubicle. Because if you look through a microscope at a cell, you can see that it's like a little cubicle. So that's where it comes from, the Latin cella. The definition of a microbe is obviously a microscopic organism that can live as a single cell, for example a bacteria, which is obviously one of the most basic or most primitive of life forms. Microbes are very important because they break down waste, they build soils, and they also capture nitrogen from the air for plants. So they're very important nitrogen fixers for plants. So we can't live without bacteria. They're so important in terms of ecosystems around us. And also, of course, in our bodies, there exist trillions of bacteria. There's a huge colony of both human and non-human cells. So the idea that we're an isolated individual entity is completely erroneous. We're not. We're made up of, trillions of individual life forms in the form of cells and bacteria. Cells are active. They can move and respond to their environment, which is another aspect of their being alive. We all started out, it goes without saying, obviously, it's just common sense, but it bears repeating. We all started out as a single cell that formed when the sperm and the egg fused. But that single cell, through its division and reproduction, has downstream given us such complexity in terms of like whole, organised, coherent organisms. Now, the presence or absence of a nucleus in a cell, nucleus being what surrounds, what encloses the genetic material of life, the presence or absence of a nucleus divides life into 2 major branches. If cells contain a nucleus, which this group includes animals, plants, and fungi, they're called eukaryotes, and that literally means good, hang on, just tapping my brain here so I didn't write this down, but I know what it means. Good, I think it means good kernel, literally. Good kernel from you, good kernel. Yeah. Whereas prokaryotes don't contain a nucleus, and they're the more primitive life forms, for example bacteria, and that literally means before kernel. They don't contain a nucleus. But in all groups of cell, there is of course a cell membrane that encircles the cell. And it's the membrane that explains why life forms can resist the drive of the universe towards chaos. Because that is the second law of thermodynamics, is that the universe is, if you like, becoming increasingly disorganised and moves towards chaos. So that's the only way in which life forms can resist that chaos and attain organisation and order is through the cell membrane, which keeps the outside world out and enables the cell to perform its most basic functions in, if you like, a sort of sheltered environment. Because it's the cell membrane that defines what is in or out of the cell. Within the membrane, cells can establish order, the order that they need to operate. All cells can detect and respond to changes in their inner state and in the state of the world around them. And they share this with us and more visible life. They grow, they reproduce, and they also possess a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose which enables them to persist, to stay alive and reproduce. So they are essentially, fundamentally alive. And then he moves on to look at genes. So he moves on from the cell, and then the next chapter he moves on to look at genes. DNA. The DNA is at the core of a chromosome, a single molecule. The rungs of the ladder of DNA are each made from links that form between pairs of chemical molecules called nucleotide bases. Now there are just 4 types of nucleotide bases: adenine, thymine, guanine and cytosine, so A, T, G and C. It is the order in which these 4 bases appear along each of the 2 strands of the DNA ladder. Which functions as information containing code. So it's kind of like sort of words that then have to be, like words, like it's like an alphabet that's written in code, sort of digital code. It then has to be translated in order to make the proteins, the building blocks of existence. The shape and chemical properties of the 2 nucleotide bases that make up each rung of the ladder ensures that the bases can only pair up in a single way. So A can only pair with T and G can only pair with C. That's a fundamental rule. They can only pair up in that particular way. Now, genes instruct the cells how to construct particular proteins. To do this, the cells translate between 2 alphabets: the 4-letter alphabet of the DNA, so that contains the letters A, T, G and C, and the alphabet of proteins, which are ordered strings of 20 different building blocks called amino acids. Now the 4-letter alphabet, which is the bases paired up, as I just mentioned, of DNA, is arranged into 3-letter words along each strand of the ladder, with most of these short words corresponding to one specific amino acid building block of protein. For example, TGT calls for the amino acid called cysteine. That's right. Now DNA is copied early in the cell cycle, which is the period of DNA synthesis. And then the separation of newly copied chromosomes occurs later, and that's called mitosis. And then you end up with 2 new cells with complete genomes. So like 2 daughter cells come out. Now one fundamental aspect of all of this is variability. As the genetic code is passed on through the cell cycle and at a larger level from parents to children and so forth, naturally certain mutations randomly occur from time to time. So we are all effectively mutants. You know, every single one of us is a mutant as our genes mutate, creating different variants. But the DNA sequence of a huge majority of the 22,000 genes that control cells is almost completely identical to those of all other people on the planet. The mutations that differentiate us is a tiny fraction, less than 1% of the total component of DNA code. So we are very, very similar. We have very, very similar genomes across genders and ethnic groups, etc. So I guess it's like an amazing equalising fact that it's worth bearing in mind how similar all of us actually are based on our DNA. All individuals are born with a very small number of novel genetic random variants, which are not shared with parents, and this helps to explain evolution. The genes have to balance the need to preserve information by staying constant, but they also have to have the ability to change, so that organisms can adjust themselves to different environments, evolution by natural selection. The chemical reactions in organisms is called metabolism. The chemical reactions in organisms is called metabolism. Metabolism builds up the molecules of life, which forms the components of cells. They also break molecules down to recycle cellular components and release energy, resulting in growth and energy. Okay, so I'm going to move on to video number 2 now, to carry on reviewing this book. So moving on to video number 2.